back to Woodworking on the Cheap. Today we're going to talk about the table saw. I'm going to show you some safety tips and how to use the fence and the miter gauge. So let's get going, and I'll put you on a different tripod and we'll go from there. Alright, so here we are at the table saw. Now you'll notice I have two push sticks on here. We mentioned this in the last video, but these push sticks are vital when using a table saw. When you're pushing stock through the blade, you want to have your fingers away and just use the push stick. Some cases, if you're pushing a larger panel through, you can use your hand as long as you're comfortable with the distance away from the blade that your hands are. So there's the push sticks, very good safety tool. Okay, so I'm gonna grab out my fence. Okay, so this is the fence that came with my Craftsman 10-inch job site table saw. Works great. I like that it locks on both ends. So you have a lock here and a lock here. But it locks with one side. So once you lock it down, that's firm. You want to find a table saw with a very, very good fence, or one that locks down well, because a lot of them are not very nice. They don't have as good of a locking force, so then you don't get accurate cuts. This one is very accurate, but when you lock it down, you want to make sure, just double check every once in a while with like a square to make sure that it is perfectly 90 degrees between the blade and the fence. And that's another thing. When you're working on the table saw, you want to make sure that from the side of the tooth, not just the blade, the metal part, from the side of the tooth is where your cut is coming from to the fence. So it's not just if you measure just from the metal part of the blade, right here, right there. Also, here is a riving knife. This riving knife is essential when you're using the table saw because it prevents kickback. When you have a board going through, back here is normally where the blade will want to grab the piece of wood and throw it backwards, and at very incredibly high speeds. This riving knife prevents that because it makes a barrier between the wood so that it can't catch the back of the wood. So you want to use your riving knife, and most of the times they come with anti-kickback pawls, which mine are right here. I don't have them on there right now, but if I'm pushing through large panels, these help in kickback as well, because if kickback does occur, these will dig into the piece of wood and it won't be able to move. So there's those. Let's get the miter gauge out. Probably pretty noisy right there. Come on. All right. This is the miter gauge that came with my table saw. Now, one thing that I don't prefer about job site table saws is that most of them are an aluminum molded top or something, and they have like a keyed miter gauge slot. So I can't really put sleds on here because of how this is keyed in. See, like when I put the miter gauge in, you can't pick it back up. That's a safety, I guess, but then that means I can't make sleds for cross-cutting, making dados and different joints like that. But there are ways to get around that. You just have to learn them, which I know a few, and I'll teach you later in the projects. So that's the miter gauge. Now, with the miter gauge, you always want to make sure, because the markings that are on the back of these aren't always perfect or correct. So you want to make sure that they are, like, this is perfectly 90 degrees with the blade, or this is perfectly 45 degrees with the blade, or 30, and so on. So you just want to make sure when you're doing a setup of your table saw that everything is 90 degrees and perfectly aligned. Okay, there's that. You also want to familiarize yourself with where the on-off switch is. Most table saws will have a paddle or a protruded switch. Now, you always want to make sure that you are very close to it, so that if you ever have an incident where your hand is caught in there, you just hit it with your knee or whack down with your hand. You want to make sure that you have clear access to the off button or the switch. Now that is very important so that you protect your hands. Let me move the camera phone. Now this, oh, that was unlocked. This is the guard, the blade guard. No, not the blade guard. This is the blade plate. So you want to keep this in good condition. This is the only one that came with. You can make ones that fit in there so that if you want a zero clearance fit, you can do that. But it's a pain with the job sites because they have weird locking mechanisms. So I just keep it stock. The riving knife guard thingy, the adjustment for that is down here, and you change the blade in here. But I mean, as long as you keep your fingers and hands away from the blade and any other body part that you want to keep away from the blade, you should be good. And you want to practice these safety tips every time you come in here. Also, when you're working with a table saw, wear shoes or wear something that's grippy. You know, you don't want to be slipping all over the floor because these create a ton of sawdust, and then you'll slip on it and fall. That could be falling into the blade too. So you don't want that. Let's see, what else is there? Yep, you familiarize with your with the blade height adjustment. The job site one that I have is pretty good. A lot of them can be kind of sticky or gummy. This one's pretty good, I recommend it. And also the blade beveling. You want to make sure that each stop is at 45 and 90 degrees that are perfect. You can adjust those stops inside. Let's see, what else? Yeah, here on the bottom of the table saw, it comes with a push stick. This one works great, especially since it can be sacrificial. I normally use the wood one because it's even more sacrificial, and then I don't have to buy a new one. Well, I mean, I guess that sums it up for this video. I guess next time that we have a project on the table saw, I will go in more depth of safety tips. But this was just familiarizing yourself with the table saw and its features. Okay, see ya.